And we are live. Olá, pessoal, tudo bem com vocês? Mais uma vez aqui, Fábio Vedovelli, dessa vez com uma presença internacional e muito forte. Tenho certeza que todos vocês conhecem o Can't See Dodds e com certeza já se beneficiou com algum artigo, com alguma talk ou utilizou algum projeto open source que ele ajudou a colocar no mercado. Então é isso, vamos dar as boas-vindas. Hello, Kent, how's it going?
Gotta find that mute button. It's going great. Yeah, super good. Thank you so much for having me. I wish that I could speak Portuguese, but you're gonna have to deal with my English today. Sorry, but thank you for
No,
having me.
it's not an issue at all. And I thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And I am sure that that introductions are not necessary because you are very well known. But before getting into the subject of this conversation today, which is Remix, I'm going to ask you, how is your recovery going?
Yeah. So recovery is moving along. So for those who don't know, I was involved in a very serious car accident about a month ago, almost 5 weeks now. And it was it totaled my car. I was hit by a really large truck going 80 miles an hour in a residential area, just exceedingly fast. They ran a stop sign and hit me on my side, right in my door.
Mm.
And yeah, it was very serious actually, or it could have been very serious, but my car kept me safe. And I suffered a two broken teeth. My front two teeth are broken, so these are fake. And but they
Well,
look great. So I'm
good
pretty.
job.
Yeah, they did a good job with it. And a broken clavicle, and I have a scar here that extends all the way across my shoulder from the surgery. And yeah, some numbness right here now. Who knows if that'll last forever. And then I have bruises on my knees and my right ankle. I haven't been able to play with my soccer team. I've gone to every game to cheer them on, but I can't play, and that's like the worst. And I need to get the bruising off of my foot before I can run around at all. And yeah, so I mean, it's hard to complain when I could have died. That's what everybody on the scene said, that that sort of a car accident you don't walk away from. So I was really blessed, and I'm grateful to be able to be here. And also, like, my hands are totally functional. I do have glass in my wrist that we're
Hmm.
trying to wait to see if it'll come out, and in my knuckle and a couple other spots. But um, aside from that, my hands are totally fine, so I can continue to work, which I would go crazy if I couldn't. So things
Yeah,
are
I
actually
believe
pretty good.
so. Yeah, exactly. Like your main tool is it's are your hands because you are typing all the time and writing content and preparing stuff. So yeah, well, and I am sure everybody that are with us, we are very happy that it was not something bigger than this. And
Yeah.
so yeah, all right. So let's get into our main subject, which is Remix. It's not something new for my audience, that I am very excited with this new tool that brings us back to the olden days of the web development. And but I brought you here to give a perspective from an insider, because you are one of the founders, and you are closing together with Brian Florence and Michael Jackson and the rest of the team. But the first question I have for you is this: you are a very successful developer, open sourcer, instructor, and from the outside, it looks like you have a very successful job, a successful business going on. So why hitting the brakes and join Remix?
Yeah, I actually love that question because it lets me talk about or it just adds perspective to the fact that I joined Remix. So for those who don't know, I for since I started programming, I was teaching on the side. I built a lot of courses on egghead.io and front-end masters, and then I made my own things, Epic React and testingjavascript.com, and then giving workshops at conferences and stuff like that. And it was very successful. Yeah, I was able to take care of I had so much flexibility. And so when I rewrote my website using Remix, around that time, my next thing that I was planning on doing after finishing my website update was to create to update the Epic React and Testing JavaScript courses to be TypeScript. And before I could do that, I needed to make a TypeScript course. And so that was going to be my first thing, was a TypeScript course. Go learn TypeScript, and then you can go through Epic React and Testing JavaScript. So I had the next probably 2 years of my life planned, because it does take a really long time to create the quality of content that I strive for. And so when I was working with Remix on my site, I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to teach people anything other than Remix. So teaching people TypeScript was not appealing to me anymore. I wasn't really excited about updating Epic React or testing JavaScript. And so I was just planning on pivoting. I hadn't committed to that yet, because I was still, I did kind of feel like I was responsible. I had this, I guess I was accountable to the people who were taking my courses and stuff, and they were hoping that I would update stuff. But my heart wasn't in it. I just really wanted to teach people Remix. And so in talking about that, and of course, Epic React, a lot of that, of course, it's all still relevant, but I would teach it very differently through the lens of Remix. And so I was planning on, if like with my update to Epic React, that it would feature Remix in a big way. And so in talking with Ryan and Michael about that, we were, at the time, Remix was still paid software, and so you needed a license. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, so how, like, can we give them a temporary license as they're going through the course or something? And the more we talked, the more it seemed like it would just be a lot easier if I was a part of Remix. And then finally, we never really determined anything like that, because I kept on saying, well, I mean, I've got this thing that I'm doing. And then finally, they decided to raise some money and go open source. And so they told me, hey, we're going to go open source. And I was like, that sounds awesome. That makes it even easier. And then around like mid to late October, we started talking about me actually joining Remix. And I decided, hey, if I can join as a co-founder and you give me enough stake in the company, then I can put my full weight behind it. And that's what we ended up doing. And so it aligned really nicely with what I wanted to do, where my heart was. And now it doesn't make any sense for me to update Epic React or testing JavaScript, because that's not my job anymore. So my full-time focus is Remix. And I know that some people are kind of disappointed about that, but those people and anybody listening right now, like, what you're really hoping to get out of me is not an updated Epic React or testing JavaScript. What you're trying to get is me to show you how I would build a website, and to teach you some of the most valuable skills that I can. And I'm still going to do that. And this is actually even better, because it's all going to be free, because it's part of Remix. So we're not planning, I mean, this may change, but we do not have any plans to make money through training. We have other plans for making this sustainable. And so for that reason, you should actually be celebrating, because now I'm able to make a lot of really high quality content for free, which aligns really nicely with what my personal mission is, which is to make the world a better place through quality software, and by teaching people how to write quality software. And so now I can reach more people, because my teaching will be accessible by everybody. So that is the story of how I joined up with Remix.
That's an interesting story, and I was personally curious about it. And another interesting thing is that not only you, but also Ryan and Michael, they have a strong background on teaching. Yeah. because React Training is their first company, I believe.
Yeah.
And now the the three of you, you are shifting to something else, and then you will concentrate all your brain power into this new tool, the Remix. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we can expect great things for a near future, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. I have a lot of plans.
Very, very good. Well, you just said that you rebuilt your website, which is not something small, uh, with Remix. And after writing thousands and thousands of lines of code, can you name three features of Remix that you believe are the game changers?
Yeah. So the first, um, by far, for me is what I've come to call the client-server bridge that Remix builds for you. And so I like to think of web application development as kind of like you've got the client side, and then you have a network chasm, and then the server side. And so you can't get across that just like it's difficult to get across that chasm. We have HTTP, but there's a lot involved in getting that client and that server to stay in sync with each other, and to load quickly. So much of the code that we write as web developers is a result of that network chasm and just the challenges of that network chasm. So whether that be fetching data or making mutations. In fact, mutations are the hardest part of that, because when you mutate something, now you got to revalidate the data that you have, because you're hanging on to a cache of what is actually on the back end. And so that's where Redux came from, and all these state management libraries came from, trying to manage this client-side cache of what's on the server. And the thing that I often talk about with this network chasm is that there are other frameworks, of course, that have been doing web development for a long time. Some of them a very long time. So you've got backend frameworks, Laravel, Rails, and various others, and they service you really well on the back end. They have a lot more than Remix comes with out of the box currently. Eventually, I expect Remix will be able to offer more of those sorts of things, like queuing jobs and an ORM and a database and all of that stuff. And we are working on improving that even with Remix. Now, people are going to be blown away by some stuff that we have coming soon. But yeah, then you have the front end side where it's Next.js or Gatsby or Create React app or your own Webpack thing. And on that side, you're having to communicate to some server. Maybe you've got serverless functions or something like that. But none of these frameworks really have a solid bridge across that network chasm. They're just shooting grappling hooks to get across the other side. And it increases complexity a great deal and reduces your ability to provide an excellent user experience. So if you're on a backend heavy framework, having a really awesome user experience is difficult to accomplish. You think of to call a specific example out, hey.com is the email service that I used for only 2 weeks because the user experience was so bad. And it's built literally by the guys who created the latest and greatest that Rails has to offer. And so you're so limited when you don't have a bridge across that network chasm. So coming from the front end, there are a lot of problems with the Jamstack and the way that we try to approach front end heavy apps. And that's not just performance, but also state management. And there's so much more to building an application than just the front end portion of it as well. And so that it leaves a lot to be desired there as well. So whether you're primarily on the front end or primarily on the back end, you have a lot of challenges getting across that network chasm. And what Remix does is builds this bridge that is super solid. And so you get the ability to have a React application that's basically like what we've termed to be a single page application sort of thing. So it's hydrated, you have client transitions, that sort of thing. But it feels like, from a developer standpoint, it feels like a multi-page app, like a Web 1.0 sort of experience, because you have the backend portion as well. And so all of your data loading code that you write and your mutation code that you write, that's all going to run on the server. And Remix is the one managing the network for you. And so for that reason, the other day I tweeted that Remix makes it feel like my Redux store is the database. And that's what it really is in actuality. And so being able to just not have to manage any sort of application state drastically reduces the amount of code that I write and the amount of bugs that I write as a result. And so this, I cannot overstate how impactful having a bridge over that network chasm has been for me in the apps that I build. So that's the first one. That's a long answer to your question. But that's one of the first things. I'll stop talking if you have any follow-ups on that.
No. I just have a comment that when the first thing I built with Remix was just a blog, and I believe a lot of folks out there are doing the same. But a blog is a very limited application, and now I started to build a second one, which is my classroom, and it's way more interactive. And I started to shift from the Remix way to the traditional way, or the way that we've been building single page applications so far. And then it started to grow in complexity and it started to become brittle. And I had this insight, well, I'm doing something wrong. I'm going to rebuild to take it down and redo in the Remix way, using forms and use fetcher. And then it everything started to go smoothly, and I could see the data invalidation being made by Remix for the first time, and I was, wow, now I understand completely why this thing is so groundbreaking. So yeah, well, feel free to list two or more of your favorite aspects of Remix.
Yeah. So that client server interaction is definitely the favorite for me. But I also really appreciate the Remix's stance on web platform APIs. And so whether you're deploying to Vercel serverless functions or Netlify or AWS, or you're doing a long-running server with Express or Fastify or Koa or whatever, Remix serves as, or you're deploying to the edge with Cloud4 Workers or Fastly's Compute on Edge or AWS Lambda at Edge. Wherever you're deploying, or even in Dino, actually, we have experimental support in Dino. Remix acts as kind of like a jQuery for platforms, where it normalizes these platforms to the Web Fetch API. So some environments that's easier to do than others, like Cloud4 Workers and Dino both support Web Fetch API natively, whereas others it takes a little bit of extra work in the adapter to convert those requests to a Web Fetch request and those responses to those platform responses. And but Remix is very intentional about exposing the web platform APIs to you wherever you are. And this has the effect, and it's not just request response, it's also forms and that sort of thing as well. And this has the effect of you spending more of your time on the Mozilla Developer Network, or just web specification, if you want to, the web documentation, than you spend on the Remix documentation. And technically, my title at Remix is the Director of Developer Experience, so the docs are my responsibility. And so I'm really grateful about this because I have much less to write because I can just say, go over to MDN. And so on top of that, what I really loved about React when I started using React was that I felt myself becoming a better JavaScript programmer by using the React framework, as opposed to what I'd been doing before with AngularJS, where I was getting to be a really good AngularJS developer, but not necessarily improving my JavaScript skills. Whereas React, you spend a lot more time writing just JavaScript.
Yep.
And I feel the same way about Remix, that the more time you spend working with Remix, the more time you spend improving your skills as a web developer. And that's in large part because where a lot of frameworks try to leverage the web platform and wrap it so that they can give you a framework-specific API, Remix tries to take a step back from that and expose the web platform API to you directly. And this has a lot of really awesome effects, aside from just what you're learning, but also the types of abstractions you can build when those are your primitives can be useful outside of Remix as well.
Yep.
And so we've already seen some examples of that too, which I think is really valuable. So that's another thing that I really appreciate about Remix, is how much it focuses on stepping back and exposing web APIs rather than just wrapping them and giving you Remix specific ones.
Very, very good. Very good. And one thing that is always on my mind while building with Remix is the amount of stuff that I don't have to think about at all, like state management in the client, and also this bridge and data invalidation, and those things keep adding up when you are building with any other framework, and the surface for bugs to appear gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it comes a time that you lose control over your application. So yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just agreeing with you. I do have another thing that I really that is unique to Remix and really, really beneficial, and that is true nested routing. So frameworks like Gatsby and Next actually have very similar nested routing to one another, and their nested routing is just from the file structure standpoint. So from the file base, so you've got your pages directory, and then you have subdirectories for every segment of the URL, and then you can have like params and stuff like that too. The problem with not being true nested routing is that when you're on a deep route, some leaf node or whatever, say you're on sales/invoices/invoice ID, so you're going to be a couple directories deep. In that file, you're responsible for the entire page when that route is active, not just the part of the page that's affected by that route, but the entire page. And so you're responsible for the header and the footer and the nav and everything else. And on top of that, you're responsible, like the UI is the easy part. We just make a component, whatever. So every Gatsby and Remix application has a layout component, or maybe several of them for different parts of the layout that are common to different screens. But what makes it really challenging is the data requirements that those things have. And so you have, if you've got a header with the currently logged in user, that page is going to be responsible for loading the user. And so what typically happens, because that's so annoying to have to do that in every single route, we're not going to server render that. We're going to load that on the client. And we convince ourselves that that's okay because static site generation is faster, time to first byte, and so it's better for performance. It's super duper not. That is a big lie that we've believed for too long, that static site generation is inherently faster, or holistically faster. Yes, the time to first byte is probably faster, but the entire user experience is absolutely not necessarily. But in any case, part of why we do this is because it would just be really annoying to have every single route go and load that data. And so what we do instead is we co-locate the data requirements to the component that's rendering that user information. And so now you're loading that on the client. This triggers a waterfall effect. And so again, your performance is going to suffer just because you don't support nested routing, and it's not ergonomic to server render that stuff. And so because or as far as like Remix and nested routing is concerned, rather than just the file system be responsible for the nested routing, you're actually, or support the nested routing, you actually support it from the code level as well. And so each route module is actually going to be rendered on the page when its segment is in the URL. And so it is responsible for rendering the part of the page that's relevant for that segment of the URL, and then identify where its children should be rendered via the React Router outlet component. And when you can do that, now all of a sudden you can co-locate your data requirements with the part of the UI that you need, and it can be server rendered. On top of that, Remix is able to do some really cool optimizations because now it knows all data requirements and JavaScript and other asset requirements just by looking at the URL. So there are no other frameworks that can do this. You have to bring in something like Relay, which has its own router and this really big complex code generation thing to make this same sort of thing work, which is great, and it works for Facebook, but it is very complicated. Remix is able to do this because we're your bundler, your router, and we're your data fetching library. And so we are able to just look at the URL and know all of the resources that you need. And so that makes the server render faster, but it also makes client transitions faster as well, because we can prefetch everything by saying, oh, this link is going here. Well, I know everything that I'm going to need when I get to that page. So let me go prefetch all of that stuff. Because we don't have to wait for the components to render before we know what those components need. So that makes a big impact on the user experience. On top of that, if the user's navigating around within a nested route, then Remix knows it doesn't need to go and fetch the data for any of the parent routes as the user's navigating around, just the part of the page that's actually changing. And so there are a lot of benefits that come from nested routing. And so those would be probably my three biggest things that I love about Remix is the client-server bridge, the focus on the web platform, and nested routing. Those are the biggest ones for me.
Awesome. And let us not forget about error handling, because error boundaries per route is something that it's awesome, because most of the times we forget or we neglect error handling because it's too it's a big of a hassle to implement. But with Remix, it's just a method that you create in your route and you are good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yeah, and not just unexpected errors, but the expected ones too. So 404s, 401s, 400s, all of those, you have a really nice declarative API for managing those as well. And error boundaries are a feature of React, but in React, if you have a server render error, it will not call your or render your error boundary. It will just throw. It will fail, and Remix makes it work. And so the Remix error boundaries are special, and because of nested routing, they're also contextual as well. So the user doesn't have the entire screen taken away from them; they just have the part or the nested route that failed, which is also really, really beneficial. And so because of that, it keeps your happy path happy. And so as you're writing your code, you don't have to worry about, oh, was there an error? Let me render this, or even loading states as well. You typically in an application, it makes a lot of sense to have like a global loading indicator as you're navigating around. If you do want to do actual animated transitions, Remix makes that way easier than ever before as well. But often you just do some sort of global loading indicator, and then you never have to worry about a loading state anywhere in your app. So you say, is the data there yet? Let's render a spinner. No, that's not a thing that happens in Remix. You do occasionally have mutations that might take a while, and so you may have a loading state for a little spinner when the user hits save. But Remix also makes optimistic UI as a pattern much easier than any other framework I've seen as well. And so even in those situations, you can kind of eliminate loading spinners for some use cases. So yeah, Remix drastically simplifies the management of, well, anything that happens on the network. That comes back to the client-server bridge, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm going to open one question from the audience, and then I will ask my own question on top of it. Okay, so this is the question. Is there any use case you would go with another React framework instead of Remix? And here I would like to make uh, a statement that Remix is not a React framework, but a server-side framework which uses React to render the UI. Okay, so it's a different thing. And then comes my question. We've been reading some claims that Remix is only suitable for building websites and has no place in the web application development realm. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, all right, great. So I'll answer Bruno's question first.
Yeah.
So no, there's not a single instance of a web application that I don't or that I think would be better served by any other framework than Remix. Now I'm literally like the biggest fanboy of Remix. So what would you expect me to say? But I can justify my opinion. I don't. We have yet to find an example of a web application that could be built better in another framework other than Remix. So there are certainly some applications that Remix is not necessarily suited for, but those applications are not suited for any other framework that I'm aware of that exists. So an example of this might be a game that is just a single page, maybe like Wordle or something, that there's no persistence. It's all just in the client side only sort of experience. There's no routing. There are a lot of things that you're going to miss out on from the Remix tool set of the things that Remix can do for you because it's just like a single page thing. But I can't think of any other framework that would serve you better anyway. So why not just use Remix anyway? Remix, your build times will be a half a second. That's pretty nice. So Remix will only make things better in those situations. So I can't think of any framework that I think would serve you better than Remix. And then also on your comment about Remix not being a React framework, that is something that we're trying to push pretty hard, is that Remix, while we use React for our UI stuff, only like 10% of Remix is actually relevant to React. So much of what makes Remix has nothing to do with React. And in the future, we do plan on supporting Preact without the Preact compat layer. So it'll be a full official support for Preact, which will require us to abstract a bunch of things further from React. And so eventually I foresee a React adapter that's probably just a couple hundred lines of code. I don't expect that to be an enormous amount of work from the React side. Of course, you're going to be using React and importing React for JSX. I was going to say for like use effects and stuff, and there are definitely use cases for use effects for state or for focus management and stuff, but you actually don't find yourself using React. In fact, just the other day I was thinking, I don't remember the last use case I had for use callback and use memo since I started using Remix. Maybe some of the lower level components that I'm using, like the UI primitives and stuff that I'm using, have use cases for that, like a combo box or something. But the typical application code does not even have a use case for those things, which is pretty sick. So yeah, you had a question. I don't think that I answered it though. What was the last thing that you said?
No, my question was regarding some claims that
Oh,
Remix is
yeah.
only suitable for websites, but not web applications.
Yeah, that one struck me surprising. I was blindsided by that. And in retrospect, I think that where that is coming from is people start working with Remix and they're like, wow, this feels a lot like PHP and Web 1.0. So it must just be for websites. And they don't realize that the Web 1.0 mental model for building an application was really simple. And there are a lot of people who are lamenting the current state of the world as far as building a web app, because they're like, man, it was so easy back in the day. Now it's super hard. And yeah, yeah, right. So so you're looking at Remix and you're saying, wow, this is super easy. And it reminds me of my good old website days. And building web apps is supposed to be hard. And so because this isn't hard, therefore it must not be a tool for web apps. But that is definitely wrong. I have some features on my website They're 100% web app features. Ryan has a really cool demo that he gave at last month's Remix Utah meetup. That was live stream. You can check the Remix YouTube channel for that, where he shows an app he built called the Planner app, where it's got like a calendar picker, and you drag and drop and a bunch of other things. And so actually, it doesn't have drag and drop, but that's a feature that we could add easily. But yeah, like it's absolutely built and well suited for anything that you build on the web. And what's actually really cool is Remix is really resilient, and we take advantage of progressive enhancement, which I guess would be like the fourth thing that I really like about Remix is the progressive enhancement aspect of it. And so, yeah, so we take advantage of progressive enhancement, but, and so that means like if the JavaScript failed to load, or if it's taking a long time to load, that app still works. And we talked about that a lot when we were getting started, which I think may have fed into this narrative a little bit more as well. But what's really cool is what you can do with Remix when JavaScript does get in the browser, because now all of a sudden you have a really nice mental model for communicating across that network. And so it is simple, but Remix makes building web apps simple. So I love it when people try it and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea how awesome this was.
Yes, this is something we see a lot, like people mind blown by how easy it is, and how productive and how good the developer experience in overall it is. So yeah, super cool. I believe I have another question from the audience, and let me see. Is there any production-ready code benchmarked between Remix and React? And I can give you the answer, but of course, you are free to elaborate. We have that amazing article comparing Remix and Next, and that made a lot of noise when it was first released. But do you have any other example that you can talk to us about it?
Yeah. If people are looking, that article is really in depth. I definitely recommend Googling Remix versus Next. Here, in fact, I'll just check it on DuckDuckGo, Remix versus Next, and we'll see if that's the first result. Yeah, so it's on the Remix blog, and it is, yeah, it's very in depth. I can't do it justice in just the time that we have here. As far as Remix versus React, like raw regular React, our target user base are people who are using React Router. So like if you're using Next, feel free, read the blog post, be convinced Remix is faster and better in every way. Maybe that's a little bit pretentious, but really the blog post tells a very compelling story. But our target isn't Next users. People were just asking us over and over again, what about Next? What about Next? And so we had to answer. And we rebuilt their own demo using Remix, and ours was a lot better. But our target is React Router users who are, they've got their own Webpack, or they're using Create React app or something. And for those, it's a very easy improvement, going from a client rendered app to a server rendered app. Not only from the user experience standpoint, it will be way better user experience, like get rid of all those spinners and everything, but also from the developer experience standpoint, because of that network, that network bridge that we talked about, as well as nested routing. So yeah, we don't have any specific benchmarks against Create React app. We will in the future. I'm planning on taking my Epic React Bookshelf app, that's a Create React app thing, and migrating that to Remix, and I'll live stream the whole thing to show people, here's how I would migrate. And that Bookshelf app actually uses React Router v6, a beta version. I don't think I use any nested routing in there though. So it is a pretty relatively simple thing, but when I'm done with that, we can do a comparison, and it will blow people's minds. The amount of JavaScript that you don't have to send to the browser at all, as well as like how fast the application loads, the fact that it works before the JavaScript is finished loading. So look forward to that. But there is no doubt in my mind that any React app that's built with like a regular Create React app sort of thing, or any client rendered app, will be made much faster just by switching over to Remix.
Very, very good. Well, we were talking before starting this live, and you told me that you were prepared to live code something, and we have 20 more minutes at least. So if you would like to show some code, just make yourself comfortable. But before you do that, there is one more question that I would like to include here. And here we go.
Yeah, spoilers, huh? Okay,
We
so
love spoilers.
I can give you a couple of spoilers. We typically we don't have a public roadmap of features, and one reason why not is because sometimes a framework will say, "Hey, this is coming," and then it never comes for 5 years or longer, and they get all of the credit for saying that it's coming, which I don't think is a great thing. So yeah, we don't have a public roadmap for that and other reasons. Eventually, maybe we will, but yeah, right now there's nothing, and we don't typically like to talk about things that aren't released yet. But I will tell you things that I have very high confidence will happen in the relative short term, and one of them is what we're going to call stacks, and so it's Remix stacks. Or at least that's the working name right now. So when I'm talking about the future, you can't hold me to anything. So just keep that in mind. So what? Yeah, I was just gonna make a joke. Like I wanted to call them stacks with STAX, like Remix stacks, and I was voted down. Everybody thought that was stupid, but I
Too
I thought it was
fancy.
pretty good. Okay, so anyway, what Remix stacks is. A lot of frameworks, there are kind of two things that you can do with a framework that I think are important, and one is making it really easy to get started, and then the other is making it really easy to adapt to change. So the code that I write, it makes it easy to adapt that to change. One of those two things is more important than the other, depending on who you are. So if you are building a lot of prototypes and demos, then it's going to be more important for you to be able to get up and running really fast. I just want to like, boom, I've got a database and authentication and all of that stuff, and I'm ready to go. That's going to be more important for you. I would venture to guess that maybe 5% or less of the people watching right now are in that sort of scenario where they're just constantly building demos. And I'm guessing that those same people are perfectly capable of making their own starter template so that they can just like copy this directory and now boom, they've got it all. So I personally don't feel like that is a super important aspect of a framework. It's nice, but it really isn't that important relative to the other thing, which is being able to maintain something and adapt it to change in the long term. Most of us, 95% of us or more, are working on existing projects that we're adding features to or removing features from, fixing bugs and that sort of thing. And so it's way more important to me that a framework is able to allow its developers or the consumers of the framework to adapt to that change. And that is something that Remix has seriously nailed. I've built a lot of applications and I've shipped apps to millions of people all over the world. And I can tell you that I've never seen something so adaptable as Remix is. So especially when you're in a team setting, you've got a team of developers working on a single project. Nothing does what Remix does from that perspective. Even I'll just give you a very simple example, then we can finally move on. Nested routing makes working in teams really just brilliant. And in fact, I would venture to say that a lot of the pain that people feel that leads them to go to complex solutions like micro front ends is alleviated because of this feature of Remix. And it's nested routing. So let's say you've got a team that's responsible for the header and the footer and just like the shell of the application. That's pretty common to have a team that's responsible for those things. And then you've got another team that's responsible for the the sales page, and then another team responsible for the admin page. Like this is a very common organizational structure type of team setup. And so and then you've got other teams, timeline page or whatever. And so without nested routing, what typically happens is you have that main team that's responsible for the header and the footer, and they just give like a component or some sort of way for people to consume that. At companies that I worked at in the past, we actually used iframes for that. And that's right when you're like, oh snap, we need micro front ends. That's when we do that. More modern companies or other companies I worked at later, we would just they would expose components and then we'd render those components ourselves. So I've done the various ways of doing this. In Remix, you do not have this problem at all, because the team responsible for the header and the footer, like the shell of the application, they're working in layout routes and the root route. And they're maintaining all of the components that are used by that. And then the components on the various teams aren't thinking about that at all. And I missed to say, like, if you are using a layout route like a component thing, and you have a change in your data requirements, now all of the teams have to go and manage the change in the data requirements, like what props you're passing and stuff like that. But because of Remix nested routes, that team can be responsible for all the data that they're loading and everything. And then the other teams don't even know about the shell of the application. They don't even care. It has nothing to do with them. So anyway, that was a really long tangent on this question. But I really like that Remix has just nailed the maintainability and adaptability aspect of frameworks. So that said, I do think that it's really nice to be able to get up and running, and especially for Remix, where our target is primarily really we're targeting all of web developers, anybody who's developing for the web. That's what we're going for. But the people who are primarily excited about Remix are front-end developers, and lots of front-end developers get really worried about working on back-end code. I was that way when I started. I did not want to set up a database. I didn't want to deploy this thing to like a long-running server or anything. That's why I liked serverless and CDNs and stuff. It was really easy to manage. And so jumping into Remix was a bit of an adjustment for me. And it took a lot of time working in the areas that I was neither comfortable nor excited to work in. And so what we have been working on is the ability to generate a project that has all of the things that most applications need. So a deploy pipeline, like a place to deploy it, a database. Like, we're not doing any of this hosting ourselves. Like, Remix isn't, I'm not announcing services that we're coming out with, but all of the configuration that you need for particular hosts, and also authentication and a database, like a local database that you can interact with, tests with end-to-end tests with Cypress, with some utilities to even do authenticated tests. We have a data model, an ORM with Prisma, ESLint and TypeScript and Prettier, and unit testing, all of that all set up with the whole CI deploy pipeline. Even like mocking of third-party services is all set up for you, so that you can hit the ground running in 10 minutes or less to actually have all of that and deploy it to production. And also we provide a staging environment, all of that configuration for having a staging environment on your dev branch, all in less than 10 minutes, which is pretty sick. So I'm really excited. And there's another aspect to this that I'm not going to tell you about. You'll just have to wait for the release. But that is something I'm really excited about, is Stacks.
Wow, so. Awesome. Like is slowly but surely becoming something more close to Rails and Laravel. Yeah, with so many nice features out of the box, completely batteries included. Awesome,
Mhm.
awesome. Well, the stage is yours. Let me add this to the stream and take it away.
All right, awesome. Another thing that we're planning on eventually is real time. We've got a really cool API that we're planning on for real time data, but I won't get too far into that. So, yeah, so this is the Remix website. If you want to get started with Remix, go to Remix.run. You can go through this. This is actually super duper cool, to kind of give you an idea of what Remix is all about. You can go to our blog. We have a blog post about Next versus Remix. We also Another common question we get is, what about server components with Remix? We're very well positioned to take advantage of server components if that is ever released. I mean, it's been 5 years already, so you never really know. But right now, their demos that they have show that we are a lot further ahead than they are. So they've got quite a ways to go for that. So that's that. We also have docs for getting started and the quick start and everything. This is actually going to change quite a bit when I have stacks, because the getting started story is a lot easier. But yeah, so you've got that to reference. And then down here at the bottom, we also have a very active Discord. So we'd love for you to join our Discord. We have a YouTube and everything, which is pretty cool. Okay, so, oh yeah, and of course, if you do want to make your way to Utah in May, we'd love to have some of you join us for RemixConf. So that is coming, and we're excited about that. Okay, so I'm gonna get pretty quick here to the demo, but yeah, let's see. I don't think, yeah, maybe I'll show you some of this stuff here in a little bit, but yeah, let's just go straight to the demo. So this is a pretty simple app that I put together just for this demo, and I can take some notes. So here's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then I can delete those, delete. So pretty simple app. I want to show you how this is implemented, and then show you a couple of unique aspects of Remix that make this even better for making changes to it. Okay, so if we come down here to our default export, and this is our notes page, we're going to render our div, and here we have a form for the logout button. So that's pretty unique. A lot of people look at that and they're like, what the heck is this? And some people look at this and be like, I feel like I'm in PHP again. Because like, this is not the way that we do logout buttons in React apps typically. Normally you'd have on click and whatever, and now you have to go and get rid of all of their data in addition to, deleting their token or whatever. But no, in Remix, you literally just say, here's my form, here's the action that I want it to post to. And if we go to the logout, this is a different route module that just has an action function, and it returns this logout utility, which simply gets the user session and destroys it, and tells the browser to set the cookie to that. So it's pretty straightforward, and it's all your code, which I really like that aspect. We're not going to talk about authentication, but even in our generator, the Remix stack stuff, we give you the code rather than giving you a big abstraction to learn. And it's less than 100 lines for authentication, which I think is pretty awesome. So if you don't provide a specific action, then these forms will post to the current route. And I'll show you that here in a second. But here we are going to determine whether or not to display no notes yet, or to display the notes. And we get this data.notes from a special hook from Remix called useLoaderData. And useLoaderData is going to reach into Remix's own context and find the data for this particular route. And Remix gets that data from this same module. So you just scroll up to here, and now you have this loader function. So the difference between our component and this loader function is that the component will render on the server, and it will render and hydrate in the client. The loader only ever runs on the server, and Remix is the one responsible for that client communication. Whether you're server rendering or making a transition, Remix will make sure that it's calling the loader properly each time. So the loader is going to, because the loader only runs on the server, you can verify that the user is logged in. You can even go get the user's data from the database, which we're doing here. You can talk to a third-party API with private keys and not worry about CORS headers. You can do anything that you need to, because it's running on a server. And Remix is managing that client-server interaction with the amazing bridge. So that is really cool. On top of that, if you have a GraphQL endpoint that you're referencing or using, the GraphQL library is actually quite large, as well as like Apollo, if you were to bring in something like Apollo or Relay. And that's a lot of JavaScript to send to users. In Remix, you don't send any of this JavaScript to users. All of the JavaScript in here just stays on the server. So you end up sending a lot less JavaScript. In fact, a lot of the JavaScript that we write that goes to the browser has to do with that network chasm that we're worrying about. And because Remix manages that for you, and Remix itself is actually pretty small, you actually don't have a lot of code that you need to send to the browser to manage that network chasm. And you, of course, aren't managing it at all. It's managed for you. So that is really cool. In addition, you can also, if you're calling a third-party API that's getting a ton of data or something, you can filter out the pieces of data that you don't need. And so the data overfetching problem that leads a lot of people to GraphQL is not a problem when you're using Remix, because you can very easily filter out the pieces you don't need. In fact, you can even get like a bunch of different data, do any computations that you need to, and just send the specific pieces that you need to the front end. And this is actually one of the things that the React team is trying to work on with React Server Components, is they want you to have to send less to the browser. Well, I've got news for you. There are actually situations with React Server Components where you will send more to the browser if you turn it into a server component. And with Remix, when React Server Components was announced, I was feeling some cognitive dissonance. I was like, why am I not excited about this? This is very strange. I should be excited about this. And I wasn't. And I realized it was because I don't have the problems that React Server Components solves because I'm using Remix. And a lot of that is because the data loading story happens just on the server. So it's really, really cool. So that's the loading piece. I've never seen anything easier. A lot of frameworks will have their own server rendering data thing, but then you're kind of on your own for keeping that data up to date. Remix will make sure that this loader is called again and again as mutations are made, so you don't have to worry about stale data on the client. And that's because Remix is your data fetching library, your bundler, and your router. It's very difficult to do that if you aren't those things. Okay, so as far as the forms are concerned, this form is going to post, and because there's no action, it'll post to this same route, and that's why we have this action right up here. So this is where our action is defined, and we'll get a request. We can determine what type of action has been made by the form data action. So this form data API is the web platform API for form data. So this request right here is the web fetch request, and it has a form data. So if you're like, what is this form data thing? You don't go to the Remix docs, you go to MDN, and so we can get the action type. Now, this action property on our form data is actually the button value. So this is another thing I learned with Remix, was buttons can have names and values. And depending on which button you click, that's the one that's going to be submitted. So you could actually have a save and a update, and then here we could say update note. And now, depending on which one the user clicks on, we're going to know which one they clicked on the server, because that's the one that gets set for the action value, which is pretty sick. I like that that feature a lot. So yeah, so then it also will serialize that input, and the browsers know how to do this. Remix just does it the same way that the browser does, and then it sends it to our backend. So that's really cool. And then we have our form for deleting. And in this one, this is another good old PHP trick or Web 1.0 trick of with our delete buttons. We don't actually have anything in here that the user is like typing in. So there's no value to be submitted, but we need to know which note we're trying to delete when we submit this data. And so what we do is we render a hidden input. And we say, here's the value for that hidden input. You could literally like serialize JSON in here if you wanted to. But yeah, so we can send anything that we want to through this really nice declarative forms API, where like most of us are used to having an on-submit handler with a prevent default, and then doing our own fetch, and then not thinking about race conditions and form resubmissions and loading states and error states. I have to think about all that stuff. You don't have to think about any of that. Just look at how much you're not doing when you're doing mutations with Remix. That is what makes Remix so special. Okay, so that's how this works. That's this whole thing works like as demonstrated. So I want to show you a couple of things. We're going to iterate and make this solution even better. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about progressive enhancement. What progressive enhancement means is your application has a baseline, and then as the platform that you're shipping to has additional features, you can progressively improve the user experience. So this was talked a lot about years ago when the browser started coming out with a lot of really cool APIs, like the Bluetooth API or the geolocation API and these different APIs. And so you would check, does my navigator support geolocation or get media devices and stuff like that? And if it does, then I can do some really cool additional things. If it doesn't, then I will, I'll tell them they have to enter their location manually. So the application works. We just make it even easier so they don't have to type in their location. And when we're talking about progressive enhancement from a JavaScript standpoint, that is, the application works without JavaScript. And if they do have JavaScript, we can make it better. We can make that experience better. Because, because there are a lot of really cool things that you can do with JavaScript that you can't do without JavaScript. So first, I'm going to disable JavaScript. And we're going to refresh the page. And I'm going to turn on slow 3G just so we can kind of observe what happens without JavaScript. So this could be I'm on a spotty connection, like it's really slow, or something's wrong with the asset server, or like various reasons that JavaScript cannot be loaded yet. Maybe I'm a really fast user. In fact, this is an example on YouTube where they load a silly amount of JavaScript before they actually render anything. And as soon as they do render their search input, it actually has to download some additional JavaScript after that. Here in just a second, we'll get that. There we go. And so I start typing and hitting enter, and it actually doesn't work because we're now loading some new JavaScript that to make that functionality work. So YouTube is totally not using progressive enhancement in the worst way, and it's really sad. So it should be able to work before the JavaScript finishes loading. That's what progressive enhancement is for JavaScript is all about. Okay, so if we're on a slow network or whatever it is, and by the way, I didn't just like hunt for an example that is like the straw man I can use for my argument. I literally experienced this as a user, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that like with the infinite budget that YouTube.com has, that they have this very simple problem. That, of course, they wouldn't have if they were using Remix. But anyway, so I've got my notes, and I want to add a new note, and I hit save. And what happens is I get a full page refresh because there's no JavaScript to prevent default, and my favicon is spinning. So now I get some sort of loading indication that something's happening. What's really cool is you'll notice that it actually works. That whole experience works. That is progressive enhancement at play. And so what happens here is we get a post to the current route, and then we have a get because this post returned a redirect. So if you've ever seen those, like you're booking a flight or paying something for your bank and it says, do not hit the back button. The reason is because they're not redirecting when you make that mutation. And so if you don't redirect, then you hit the back button and it will redo this post request. And so that's why in Remix, we tell you on a successful action, you need to do a redirect. And so that's why we've got these redirects right here. So anyway, what's happening, that's why we're getting this post and then immediately followed by a get. And because the Web 1.0, the way that all of this works, and because Remix understands this and makes it work, we don't have to worry about managing any state or anything. There's literally no JavaScript on the page anyway to manage that. So it all works. Progressive enhancement is awesome. So as cool as it is that this works without JavaScript, we really like JavaScript a lot. And so I'm going to enable JavaScript. And there are like some accessibility things you can't do without JavaScript. Like we need JavaScript for some features of the web. And it's really nice to have it to improve the user experience. Like having a loading indicator in the favicon is not so great. I'd rather have a nicer loading indicator that's more contextual. So I want to show you something interesting though. Now that we have JavaScript, I'm going to make another, whatever, it doesn't matter. Another note. And watch closely here. When I hit save, I don't get any indication anywhere that something's going on other than the network tab, which of course your users aren't going to have open. And so what we've done is we progressively enhanced to a worse experience. So I would say progressively dehanced, I guess, if that's a word. So we have made the experience worse by bringing in JavaScript in some ways because we haven't implemented a pending state yet. And so I want to show you what it's like to add that pending state. So first of all, I want to say if you are on a tight budget or a tight schedule and you're building a feature and you're like, oh man, I don't have time to add a pending state because like, I don't know why, the designers haven't shown it to me. Then you literally just come over here and you say, okay, for this form, we're going to reload document. And now the whole thing works. It does a reload. The user gets the spinner and everything. And so it's not an excellent user experience, but if you don't have designs for a loading state or whatever, at least you can ship something that works and then go off to Hawaii or something and come back and fix it later. So that's really cool that we have a baseline of something that works. But we don't want to do that. Who wants to do that? Not me. We want to have a nice pending state. So let me show you how easy it is. And your coworkers would be like, dude, just add a pending state because it's so easy. So we're going to use this hook called use transition to get a transition. And this is not the React 18 use transition, which still, again, has not shipped. So we got it in first. But this is a special transition from React or from Remix. And so as the user is navigating around your app, making form submissions or clicking on links, this transition will hold all the information about where they're going and what information was submitted if they made a form submission. And so we can use this to know if we are in an is saving state. And so we can say transition dot submission. And this is going to have all of the information for a submission if there happens to be one. So this could also be undefined. And so we'll do the little Elvis operator there to get the action. And if our action is create note, then we know that the transition that's happening is because the user hit the save button. So we are making a transition for saving. And so in that case, why don't we go ahead and disable the button, and we'll also change what it says to saving, otherwise save. And then you can have your designer come in later and give you a nice spinner or some sort of loading indicator. And so with that in place, now I can say this is saving and hit save. And now I get a nice loading state, a pending state. I've actually progressively enhanced to a better user experience. And you notice that I, again, don't have any code that says, okay, they saved this, so now let's go and update our list of notes in our use state or whatever. None of that exists because Remix is automatically making that post request and then making a get request for me. So it's managing that new post or that new note that I just submitted, and it updates all of this for me. Super duper cool. So let's do the same thing for our note display here. So we're going to get our transition from use transition, and we'll get our is deleting from transition.submission.form data. Get action is delete note, but we can delete multiple notes on the page, right? So we need to know which submission is deleting the note. So we'll say transition submission form data dot get note ID. So if we are deleting and the note ID is the one that we're rendering, then we know that we're deleting this one, and we can add our disabled here and our deleting or delete here. Okay, so yeah, same thing. Making this adjustment and handling this loading state couldn't be easier. And it's all managed for you by Remix automatically. So there's no like set loading and then set not loading and set data and set error, any of that stuff. You don't have any of that to worry about. So that's really cool. So then we can delete, and it is now deleting. Let's add the ... because I prefer having the ... So that's cool. Now, we have another problem though, because of the way that we've implemented this. And that is what happens when I delete multiple and we're on a slow network connection. So watch this, delete, delete, delete. So there are a couple of things going on right here that I want to talk about. First off, you may have noticed that it said deleting on only the last one that I clicked delete on. That's not good because I'm actually deleting all of them at the same time. So that's not great. We'll talk about that in a second. The other thing I want to point out, though, is you notice that these are red right here. That's because those requests were canceled. It would be probably more accurate to say that those responses were canceled because you cannot cancel a request. It's already gone. The server's already got it, and it's doing stuff. There's no web platform API for saying, hey, remember that request I sent you? Never mind. Don't, undo that. There's no way to do that. And even if there were, that's not what we would want to do anyway. So we're just canceling the response. And the reason that we do this is actually because this is what the browser does already. Go ahead and pull up your network tab on any website and set the turn off JavaScript, and then set your network to slow 3G and then click on a bunch of links, and you'll notice that it'll say, okay, I'm going to send you over here. Oh, never mind. We'll cancel that and we'll send you over here, because that's what's happening. That's what you're trying to do. I only want to do this one thing at a time. And so that's really cool that Remix simulates that same thing with JavaScript, so that we make sure that we never take into account a response that is now incorrect because the user made a different mutation. And so the response from the previous mutation doesn't matter anymore. They changed something else. So whatever comes back from that first response is going to be old now. And so Remix automatically handles those form resubmissions for you, race conditions, everything. And the basic rule is that Remix will only take the response that was sent last. And that's how it works. So it's pretty sick the way that works. So the reason that this is happening, though, that we got those weird delete things is we are modeling this as a navigation. So you can only have one navigation on the page at a time. I can only go to one page at a time. That's why if you click on a bunch of links, the browser will cancel those different navigations for you automatically. Because if you click on this link and then click on that one, you don't want to go to both of them. You want to go to the one that you clicked last. And so we're modeling these forms as navigations. That's the default for the web. That's the default for Remix. And most of the time, I wouldn't say most of the time, but like a lot of the time, when you're building a web app, you do actually want to navigate the user somewhere else. So they're on the project create page, they fill in the form, they hit submit, and then when that is created, they're navigated over to the project details page so they can see what they just submitted. Unless you check a little checkbox that says, I want to make another one, in which case you would use this feature I'm about to talk about. So there are use cases for both navigating as well as not navigating and just making a fetch call. In either case, the mental model for you as the developer is the same, and this is a very important point. I want to show you that, but I'll just mention here really quick, like we've got a bunch of history entries. We're all redirecting to the same page that we're on. And so each one of these form submissions is a history entry. That's not really the UI that we want for this particular example. So what we're going to do first is we don't want to send a redirect on these anymore. So I'm just going to update the delete note to save time, but we probably want to do the same thing for create note as well. So instead of redirecting, we're actually going to return some JSON, and we'll say just success true. We're actually not even going to use this, but that's what we'll do. And then we're going to come down here. So when we delete, instead of transitioning, I actually just want to make a fetch. So instead of use transition, I'm going to say use fetcher. And this is another hook that comes from Remix for making regular fetch requests. And it has the same API as a transition for the most part. So I'm just going to rename this to fetcher, and we're still determining whether we're deleting based on the action and the node ID. But instead of using this global form, or it's not global, like it's imported from Remix, but instead of using the primary imported form, I'm actually going to use a fetcher.form. So this fetcher has a component called a form that is for making mutations, having a declarative API for making mutations for this particular fetcher. So that's all. That's everything I need to change. You make the action not redirect anymore, and you make the fetcher, and you could actually make that conditional too. You could say if they check the box that says I want to create another one, then don't redirect. If they didn't, then do redirect. So like that's really easy to control. There's no API for it. It's just like you write the code. It's amazing. And so yeah, you update it to not redirect. You change from use transition to use fetcher, and you change from a regular form to the fetcher form. And you've completely changed the behavior, but not really changed the mental model at all, which I think is pretty awesome. And so if we come back to our app now, and we're still on a slow 3G network, and actually let's speed it up so I can add a couple really quick. So 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Yep, 4. There we go. And now we'll go to slow 3G. I'll go delete, 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 and they all are deleting off, and they get sent off on their own. And Remix ensures that we only care about the latest response, so that all of the notes are, like we keep everything up to date, which I think is pretty sick. I really like that a lot. I think that is everything that I wanted to show. I guess I could show one other thing really quick, and that is optimistic UI. So if not, or if is deleting, then why don't we just not render this note anymore? The note display, just who needs it? So rather than showing a disabled and a deleting, let's just be optimistic that this is going to work, and we'll come back over here, no throttling, 1, 2, 3, and 4, yeah, whatever, and then delete, 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 delete. That's pretty cool. I guess that was not throttling, but I think you get the idea. And then what's really cool is if we say, I don't normally show you everybody this, but let's say that there was a problem. Instead of saying success true, it's not actually deleted. Hopefully this works, because that would be sad, because I've never done practice this one. But we're going to say if the math.random is greater than 0.5. So in half of the cases, hopefully, then we'll return JSON with an error. Oh no, whatever. And you'd probably want a UI for this or whatever. But let's say that one of these failed. So our optimism was misplaced, is what I like to say. So we thought it was going to delete, but it's not. So we said, hey, we're not. We're going to remove the deletion or the note component. But actually, it wasn't deleted, so it should stick around. That's one of the hardest parts of optimistic UI, is thinking about what happens if I need to roll back my optimism. So we're going to say 2 and 3 and 4. And then we'll bring it back to slow 3G really quick. I'll say delete, 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 delete. And they're all gone. Sweet. That's my optimism at play. Oh, one of them failed. Oh, 2 of them failed. Oh, and they're back. And I don't have to think about rollback for optimistic UI. That's so sweet. That is awesome. So you get the, and of course you would want to show the error or whatever. But yeah, it's really awesome that you don't have to worry about that. You think about the Twitter UI for when you favorite a tweet. They don't as soon as you click on it, it turns red. Click on the heart. As soon as you click on that heart, it turns red. But it didn't favorite that fast. You got a network chasm to go across. But they just say most of the time these tweets are going to actually work. This favorite's going to work out. But sometimes the tweet was deleted. So then the heart is no longer filled in, and they get show a little message that says that tweet was deleted. And so I don't know what code they had to write to make that work, but I imagine it is not as simple as this. Just me being, yeah, that's what I would expect. So yeah, so this is really, really awesome feature of Remix as well. So there you go. I guess I'll include that in the future, because that was pretty darn easy to demonstrate that. So that is Remix demo for you. I think it is the best, and I look forward to seeing all the cool things that you build with Remix.
Awesome. Really, really good. The best examples are the simple ones. Yeah. And this presentation, for those that are not into Remix yet, was a very good one, because very quickly you could showcase a lot of powerful features. So thank you for that. Really, really, really cool. Well, yeah, it's almost 1 hour and 20 minutes, and I believe it's good. And our audience, it's with us since the beginning. So yeah, it was a big success, and I thank you very much for taking the time to come here tonight to talk to us. And well, we are really, and I am really looking forward for what's next for Remix.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am also really excited about Remix. I feel like when I started playing with Remix, I realized that I kind of lost excitement for web dev. And Remix reignited the fire for me for some really cool things that I could build with the web. And so I'm excited to see what other people build with what Remix is.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you very much. And again, it was a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all that you do for the Remix community, your Remix cookbook and everything else. It's been awesome. So thank you for for being a really great resource for the Remix community and the web dev community at large.
Thank you. It's just the product of my excitement. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.